Sorry for those delays. I wasn't being deliberately lazy in wanting to sit down. It's just would have worked with our format later, but we'll work around it, yeah. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to be here. It's a really great conference, and looking forward to the rest of it. So I'll start my talk. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about geontology as a beginning, and then later on I'll bring in Natasha and Vivian and we'll talk about some specifics. First of all, I want to frame it with this idea of Carboniferous insurgency. So we have to begin with speculative realism. Recent ideas emerging from the disputed philosophical genre of speculative realism demand for us to understand the significance of the unthinkable. How can we possibly conceive of time, space, and the processes that formed the universe? Because these things existed before thought. Quentin Meillassoux, a French philosopher and author of After Finitude, puts forward the idea of contingency as an absolute principle of rationality. Every event, everything, every law in nature is contingent. There is no reason for anything to be as it is, and nothing can intervene between a being or law and its absolute contingency. Cosmic and geological events and the materials that they create have their own agency. The chain of contingencies that have effectively formed the universe continue to play out according to the localized rules of thermodynamics and entropy. Since the human is the only species on the planet to re-enter geological time, human cultures and human actions have become part of this game plan. So my question is, how can we understand ourselves as being at the end of a long line of contingent events that have not only led to our existence, but have also provided us with the rules to the game which we are now playing? So I guess I'm searching out for examples of how cosmic and geological contingency play out, how the materials that make the Earth have their own agency, and how we might have to go inside and beyond the Earth to speculate into primordial realms in order to understand our contemporary relationship with the Earth. The Earth contains its own heat source at its centre. The molten iron core of the planet is constructed of materials that are left over from the formation of the Sun. The Earth has its own inner sun. It's a kind of malformed solar reject. In Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Sigmund Freud gives us a model of trauma that describes the human psyche as a spherical organism that develops a protective crust as a result of internalized reaction to external stimuli, a response to trauma. So this is quoting Freud. It says, let us picture a living organism in its most simplified possible form as undifferentiated vesicle of a substance that is susceptible to stimulation. Then the surface turns towards the external world will from its very stimulation be differentiated and will serve as an organ for receiving stimuli. It would be easy to suppose that as a result of the ceaseless impact of external stimuli on the surface of the vesicle, its substance to a certain depth may have become permanently modified, so that excitatory processes run a different course in it from what they run in the deeper layers. A crust would have thus formed, which would at last have been so thoroughly baked through by stimulation that it would present the most favourable conditions for the reception of stimuli and become incapable for any further modification. But this model of crust being formed by trauma doesn't quite work in the case of the Earth, because the Earth has its own inner sun, the boiling inner sun that drives the mechanisms of plate tectonics. The movement and circular flow of materials being forced to the surface of the planet by convection become crust, which is then forced to break and fold, and eventually gets pushed back into the molten heart through subduction. This action leads to the phenomena of volcano, earthquake, and of course tsunami. But conversely, these destructive actions bring a host of useful minerals closer to the surface, where we can dig them up. The restless movements of the Earth's internalized energy source are one of the principal reasons why there are such uniquely rich and varied mineral deposits in the Earth's crust. The Sun. For Georges Bataille, the Sun is the original model of rampant capitalism. The economy of the Sun is an economy of extravagance and absolute wastage. The destiny of the Sun is to burn itself up completely and with no reservation. The sun is described by philosopher Reza Negrestani as the thermonuclear catastrophe at the centre of the planetary system, a continuous, unending explosion, spitting and pulsing, that if it were not held in check by the gravitational pull of its own spinning mass, would envelope the whole planetary system, which of course is the latent destiny of the sun, eventually. For the sun, there is no reserve. Everything must get used up in a suicidal drive to self-annihilation, enveloping all in its path and utilising all potentiality to make the consuming fire burn faster. The sun has a singular, unavoidable fate and will eventually extinguish everything in proximity with it, along with itself. The biosphere. So we have our habitat, the biosphere, a thin layer of gas and liquid trapped between the boiling inner core of the Earth and the destroying glare of the sun. I love these images, by the way, these kind of improbable digital renderings of things which we can have hope of conceiving of them. You know, they just don't exist in thought for us, so we have to render them with computers. This is images from Walter Myers. He's an amateur modeler of prehistory. He lives in Chicago. The sun acts upon the crust, showering it with its continual excess. All life on the surface is an expression of the sun's excess. And here I'll quote from Bataille, from his collected works. It is the green parts of the plants of the solid earth and the seas which endlessly operate the appropriation of an important part of the sun's luminous energy. It is in this way that light, the sun, produces us, animates us, and engenders our excess. This excess, this animation, are the effect of the light. We are basically nothing but an effect of the sun. So, faced with the capitalist hedonism of the sun's overbearing extravagance, it's almost as if life was forced to find ways to absorb the toxic gift of solar excess in a kind of do or die move. So in the Carboniferous period, 350 million years ago, lasting for millions of years itself, living entities absorb and transform gases into solid mass using the excess energy of the sun, thereby changing the chemistry of the biosphere. So we have giant vertical mosses and some really dopey-looking lizards, locking up vast amounts of free carbon to form coal, oil and gas. It's a clever sideways manipulation, really, of materials as a result of multiple evolutionary trauma. Life itself rose up against the sun's dominance, initiating an insurgency that lasted for millions of years. So, in Sandor Ferenczi's model of trauma, and Ferenczi was a contemporary of Freud, the traumata are not held at bay through a sacrifice, they are sequestered inside through a process of introjection. For Ferenczi, the trauma is not cut into the internal realm from the outside. Instead, the discrete insider opens up itself in order to consume it, interject it as an insider alien to keep it at bay. But in doing so, as Manatbrata Guha writes, the discrete defender also opens itself up to a deep chemistry that radically alters it to unimaginable extents. So life itself is a geological force. So here's a quote from Reza Negrestani's work, a theory fiction cyclopedia, complicity with anonymous materials. Petroleum and fossil fuels exemplify a Tellurian conspiracy against the sun's solar economy, trapping the energy of the sun accumulated in organisms by means of lithologic sedimentation, stratification, anaerobic decay, and bacteria in such highly stratified sedimentary basins. In this case, petroleum is a terrestrial replacement of the monastic self-indulgence of the sun, or solar capitalism. Earth dismantles the hegemony of the sun on a subterranean level. But recall, however, this is paraphrasing now, that they spoke always of a buried terrestrial sun which must be exhumed, a rotting sun, oozing black flame, the black corpse of the sun. So, the human, as the only species to effectively re-enter geological time, to burrow deep down into the lithosphere, how can we look at ways in which these materials work their way out through human action as part of the economy of the sun, Because in the economy of the sun, all energy contained must be dissipated, all capital must be spent, the excess must be released. Deleuze and Guattari proposed that capitalism always existed, it was just lying dormant, waiting for the perfect host. In Platonic philosophy, the sun is held as the image of enlightenment. So in his pursuit of Platonic enlightenment, has the human unwittingly become the agent of the sun and simply joined the sun in its project to burn everything up in a nihilistic fit of extravagance? Could it be that our whole project of industrialization has just been an expression of material contingency? Are we dominating nature, or is nature in fact dominating us? Can we use this geological approach to resolve the problem of ecological guilt? Because as we know, guilt is never healthy. Could we use this to develop a cultural position to effect real change, to mount a second successful insurgency against the sun's capitalist hegemony? Okay. So we're going to discuss a few scenarios and show some examples. And do you think it's going to work? The problem is you're going to have to sit there and I'm going to be stood here. What we've just witnessed there is the destruction of the city of Most, now in the Czech Republic, a North Bohemian Gothic city, which was destroyed in between 1968 and 1975 to make way for a coal mine. And this is open strip mining or open cast mining. And you can see here where the city once stood, this big depression in the centre of the photograph. So this whole city, which was written about by Goethe, was demolished, and all the inhabitants were moved to a new kind of impotent Bolshevik modernist dream park made of concrete. And the excess which they were mining, the bound excess of the sun which they were digging up, then kind of expressed itself through other extravagances within the culture and within the area, not just as a release of energy to make electricity to power industry and to heat homes, but also in this new city where they built this sort of incredible conglomeration of horse racing tracks and car racing tracks and water parks and all these other kind of compensations, extravagant compensations for the fact that their community and their whole history had just been completely eradicated. And in the bottom left-hand corner of this picture, you see a church. This was the only building that was saved from this whole period. Like every other building in the city was destroyed, as you can see, but this church was saved. But this church originally was in the centre of this pit. Slightly to the right at the bottom there, you can see a kind of a cemetery. So all of the graves in the whole city were exhumed and everybody was moved to this cemetery here, but in effect the whole landscape is a cemetery for this one city. So this church this single building that was saved. This is how it was done. It still holds the world record today for the largest stone building ever to have been moved in one piece. It's like 10,000 tons. And, like, why? Why? I mean, this was the Soviet times. Like, religion was not actually functioning. Like, it was outlawed. So the question is, why do they do it? It's just completely an expression of excess.
We talked a little bit about the idea of the toxic gift and this uprooting, of sort of uprooting of a belief system and having it suspended so that it no longer touches the geological surface of extraction.
Right.
But that it's derailed from purpose and belief.
Uprooted and made mobile. Yeah. I mean, this endeavour was just really incredible. The engineering was done by the Skoda Corporation, and my colleague in Prague, who's researching this project with me, has actually met the chief engineer from this project, and he's 92 years old now. Recently lost his wife, and now he spends all of his time in his kitchen perfecting the recipe for cheesecake. So, this project will turn into a film one day, and that, I think, has to be a central scene. This whole idea of just the endeavour of humanity, this constant exploring, quite male act of endeavour, exploration, and industrial endeavour. Just in this old guy is now just playing out through cheesecake in his kitchen. It's great. Do you want to say anything about this?
Maybe the image?
Yeah, this image. Yeah, so this is just actually came through just at the beginning or the end of last week. These are some of his original sketches. His back of the envelope drawings for this project of moving this church.
Could you describe could you just point to the line, describe the line?
Yeah, so the curved line in the right-hand image is basically for some reason they needed to change the orientation of the church, just to make it fit into their new kind of augmented landscape. And so you've got a 10,000-ton church. You can't really put it onto a turntable and swing it around. You have to, it's going to fall apart. So he came up with his kind of like engineering genius in this project was to make it transcribe this arc across the surface of the land so that it would end up in a different orientation, but in such a way that he calculated the sort of maximum radius the building could travel in, so that it didn't introduce a unequal stress on one side of the building to the other. Because obviously, when you take a solid object and make it go in an arc, it's going to have a tendency to, take the shape of the arc itself. So, moving on. So another strange twist, a kind of a collapsing and enfolding in the case of Most, is that as the city was being destroyed during the early 70s, it was used as a film location because it was the only place in Europe you could go and buy a whole set of Gothic buildings and then blow them up and film it. So it became a film location for Hollywood films. So this is actually still from an adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's novel Slaughterhouse-Five, which tells the story of a guy who's kind of caught in time. He's not caught in time, he's caught in this repeating time travel that he's got no control of. So he's travelling through his whole life randomly, appearing at different points and then sort of reappearing at other points. And in one part of the story, he gets caught up in the bombing of Dresden. So this is an image which in Hollywood film world is showing the bombing of Dresden, but in actual fact, it's showing the destruction of Most through, so you've got the extravagance and the destruction of war collapsing in on top of the extravagance and destruction of the city because of mineral extraction.
Yeah, and also when we talk about time traveling through the ruins, no?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
fact that, again, there's where what the time becomes a resource as well as an entrapment.
Right, and such an important factor. I mean, this idea of re-entering geological time as well, and of course, this is the humans' re-entry into geological time is now being surpassed by the humans' re-entry into cosmic time with the particle accelerator underneath Switzerland. You know, this is the next time travel which we're going to embark upon. This is another clip from another film, The Bridge at Remagen. And this is in this film it tells the story of a bridge which became the sort of locus of attention at one point during the end of the Second World War, when the German army was sort of were moving out of back into Germany, and this bridge became a point at which they would have to retreat across it, and the Allies wanted to stop that and all these different things. But this was filmed in Most again because they could blow up the buildings, and so the city was full of American soldiers, or Hollywood actors dressed as American soldiers with all of their American tanks and their American jeeps, just at the moment when the Soviets invaded in 1968. So you can imagine, again, this like incredibly confusing compounding and unfolding. Luckily, it didn't start World War III, but it had the potential to, maybe on some level.
Can we go a little bit into the alchemy and the
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about that. Here we have Edward Kelly on the left-hand side. Edward Kelly was an English alchemist who was working with John Dee. He was John Dee's psychic, his sort of psychic sidekick. And he was living in Prague with John Dee, as were many of the alchemists 400 years ago. Because Prague had, King Rudolf had a special commission for alchemists, and Prague became known as Magic Prague, because all of Europe's alchemists and mathematicians and scientists, or proto-scientists, I guess, were all there. So Edward Kelly did something to annoy the king, and the king banished him to the city of Most. And when he was in the city of Most, he did something to annoy the inhabitants of the city of Most. I think he was just basically an arrogant guy, you know. So he managed to annoy people wherever he went. So he got incarcerated, put into a prison in Most. And his indignant response to this was that he cursed the city and said that it would be wiped from the face of the earth. So this is incredible in itself, an incredible coincidence or an incredible entrapment or unfolding, but also the story gets more complicated because he allegedly escaped, or he tried to escape and was supposed to have been killed during his escape from the castle in Most. But there was a legend that he managed to actually get away and escape across the marshes, and nobody knew where he went. So on the right-hand side of this image, you see the roof of the castle at Ziherl, which is about 10 kilometers away from Most, on the other side of a swamp. And this swamp now is a huge coal mine. And when I visited this castle to just look at the way, this castle is kind of falling into this coal mine, the mountain is collapsing, the mine is coming underneath the mountain, and the land is subsiding, and there's a group of volunteers who are trying to restore this castle and trying to prop it up. As the mine gets closer and closer to it, they get sort of more fervently try and keep it in one piece. And I went to visit them, to talk to them, and the week before I arrived, a crypt had opened up underneath the castle, and I guess you know where this is going, because inside this crypt, which had only been opened by the action of the coal mine below, they discovered a 400-year-old alchemist's laboratory. So this was obviously the legend was true, Edward Kelly escaped and ended his days here. But, I mean, this idea of alchemy and transformation and all of these things come into this. This is like this endeavor of mineral extraction and industrialization is just alchemy on a grand scale, surely. Another point about this is this idea of overburden. So this mine on the right-hand side is actually about 300 meters deep, which is absolutely incredible for a strip mine. You know, in a strip mine, they basically, it covers a huge area of land, but they're only mining one strip at a time. So they dig down to the material that they want, and as they move forward across the landscape, the material from in front of them gets put behind them. So the actual hole in the ground stays the same size, but the mine can become like sort of 20 kilometers long as it travels through the landscape, and you just get this huge mass of churned soil and rock behind, which just builds and builds. In this case, it's 300 meters deep, which is utterly economically unviable. It costs so much more to dig down to this depth and remove all of this material. The coal there is only brown coal. It's not very old, and it's not very high quality, and it's full of sulfur, which has to be removed before you can use it. So the only way, this is not bona fide by any means, but if you talk to local people in that area, they will assure you that the only way that the mines can actually make any money in this region is that the mine companies can claim the European Union grants for the recultivation of the spoil heaps, and that's where the profit comes from.
So we have the mine almost becoming part of a sacrificial economy itself as well. And it's interesting to think through the notion of the alchemist and the will to transform the material and to extract value, and also by dint of labor in terms of mining industries as well.
Yeah, and it's absolutely insane. There's another sort of complication in terms of, I don't know, I haven't really got my head around what's happening, but I'll explain it to you. There's, the mine companies want to expand, obviously, and they cannot do what they did to Most, in the 70s, because now they have democracy, and a sort of neoliberal agenda apparently prevents them from doing that. Or maybe not, it's like this is such a convoluted story in itself. But this is the interesting thing about this instance, is because it does not have that, This is why I'm fascinated by Most. And the next little story, if we have time to get to it, Donetsk and Ukraine, is because it is like an accelerated example of what, if the material itself could have its will, this would happen everywhere. Because in these instances, there were no like feedback loops from society, from like a sense of ethics, or from government, or anything. It's just like willfully rampant. But what's happening now in this region, in the areas that the mine companies want to expand into, and which they do not have the right to, but they're hoping to get in the future, is that they're working with parts of the government to actually rehouse gypsies from Slovakia, so like Romani gypsies being rehoused from Slovakia into the villages in this region, in the hope that the presence of the Romani gypsies would drive out the village people, so that the villages would become abandoned and they would be able to open the mines up. So there's all these strategies.
If we can move through the
last
part, and then we're maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. So this is very quickly. What I did with this research was just to make at this stage, because this is a process and the research is far from finished, and I just made this installation in Prague inside the central electricity offices of the former central electricity offices of Prague, where I just kind of put all of these events on a timeline, and the timeline included the origin of the coal, or the formation of coal. So obviously this couldn't actually be done in this gallery situation, because the start of the line on the left as it goes into the floor, which begins is at the same scale as everything else. This line begins 170 kilometers away, so it's like sort of making time into space. There's another installation shot of that. So quickly moving on to Donetsk. Donetsk is a city in far eastern Ukraine, and has a population of 1.5 million. It's Ukraine's largest iron and steel producer, and at one point it was the largest iron and steel producer in the whole of the Soviet Empire and the whole of Europe. And it was founded And this is another example of acceleration, and an accelerated example of these phenomena, because it was founded in 1869 by a Welsh guy who was commissioned by the Tsar to ironclad the Russian Navy. The guy, John Hughes, told the Tsar that he didn't have enough iron to do it in Russia, so the Tsar said, well, get me some iron. So he sort of like left London with a troop of Welsh workers and some ships, and they headed out across the steppe and founded this new city, which grew into this huge conglomeration. There we see Hughes on the left. This is the works in Cyfarthfa in South Wales, where he was actually an apprentice and would have worked in these ironworks from a very, very early age. And the story with this photograph is on the top right-hand side. Of the right-hand image, you can see a huge house, like a really giant house. And the story is that the workers in this works had to walk past this house every day to get to their place of exploitation. And this kind of installed this, like, common boy does good. I'm going to get me a big house one day kind of thing. But where could he do it? Because as he grew up, the economy based on mining in South Wales was collapsing. The Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom was like coming to an end. So you get this phenomena of transferal. This is Donetsk again. So there's really, the potential, this huge behemoths machine of industry and extraction. Once it gets going, the capital that's involved just make it roll on. There is no stopping it. It's exactly like the sun. It has to exhume everything. It has to burn everything up. Quickly. So this is the Memorandum of Association of the New Russia Company, which John Hughes founded in 1869. And this is, just to illustrate very quickly, something else which we've already talked about really with Rosalind. But just a quote from the memorandum. Text from the New Russian Company Memorandum of Association. The objects for which the company is established are to manufacture locomotive engines, railway carriages, wagons, turntables, and every description of rolling stock, rails, railway plant, armour-plated and other ships, iron forts, turrets, shields, embrasures, and other war defences of iron or other materials, shot, shells and weapons and munitions, and materials of war of all and every kind and description. So, the extraction is not only about controlling or getting hold of lands to create the materials of war. It's the object of war, it's the subject of war in itself. And so, this last image is a picture of the Donbass Fold Belt, which is a geological map of the region around Donetsk in Ukraine. And it just shows, again, just to sort of bring it round and finish off on this idea of geological contingency. Because what's unique about Donetsk and why it's become such a powerful and exploited place, and its power unfolds in many other ways, which we could talk about, but maybe we will. But you can see here that it has iron, it has limestone, and it has coal, all in one system, all in one geological system. So this is like all coming from different periods of prehistory and the primordial movements of the crust of the earth. The contingencies laying on top of each other to make this phenomena is just like mind-blowingly unreal. That they're all there in the same place. Like iron is formed in the about 2.5 to 3 billion years ago. But when cyanobacteria kind of first evolved to photosynthesize, the sea was a liquid solution of iron, basically, because there was no oxygen in the biosphere, no free oxygen in the biosphere to make the iron oxidize, so it is in solution in the water. And then as these cyanobacteria, the first examples of life on the planet, like evolve photosynthesis, they start to release oxygen, and the first thing that oxygen does when it gets released into that environment is to crystallize the iron and make it fall to the bottom of the sea. So you get these like strata of iron. in the Carboniferous period, you get the strata of coal and the strata of limestone, which we all know about. But then, on top of all of that, you get this unique sort of system of tectonic movements of plates hitting each other and enfolding and bringing all of this material together up to the surface into an environment where we can actually mine it. So this is what our society is based on. Geological contingency, you know, this is everything is about this.
Maybe since we are running out of time, Paul, if we could check with the audience if they want to discuss, if there are questions.
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, we might need to take a break, and there's also material relating to these two speakers that we will show during the break, so we could also step into that.
Yeah.
Are there questions?
Maybe we could just, the break time is coming up, yeah? So if people want to leave, just leave, and people who want to stay and ask questions, it's fine.